You know that moment when everything clicks into place and the truth you've been ignoring finally hits you like a freight train? Yeah, I had one of those. But let me backtrack a bit. Last Friday was supposed to be just another night. We'd argued earlier in the week about something stupid, but we patched it up, or so I thought. Then, out of nowhere, Jessica, the woman who usually couldn't stand the idea of going out without me, casually tells me she's going to a party. A party I'd specifically told her I wasn't okay with. Now, I'm not the controlling type. We've always had this understanding. If something doesn't sit right with either of us, we talk about it. Except this time, it was different. She stood there in our kitchen, looking straight through me as she said it. "I'm going, whether you like it or not," she said, already holding her car keys like my opinion was just background noise. It wasn't a question, and it definitely wasn't a request. That's when the first flicker of doubt sparked. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking it. Maybe she just needed space. But then I saw the dress. Let me paint you a picture. Tight black, far too short, and paired with heels I hadn't seen in years. The kind of outfit you'd expect someone to wear if they were trying to turn heads. And not just any heads. I knew this wasn't about catching up with Stacy and her wild crew. This was about something else entirely. I didn't say a word. She took one last glance in the mirror and smiled, that cold, distant kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. She didn't even kiss me goodbye. Just a quick, "Don't wait up," and then she was gone. I spent the rest of the evening pacing the house like some kind of idiot. Something was gnawing at me, a deep, dark pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. But I didn't call her. I didn't text. If she wanted to act like that, I wasn't going to be the one chasing after her. No. I'd let her have her night, and I'd have mine in silence. Around midnight, I started going over every conversation we'd had over the past few weeks, replaying the small, seemingly insignificant moments in my mind. Was she distant lately? Yeah, maybe a little. Less affectionate? Sure. But what really started to bother me was that every time I'd ask her where she was, the stories felt a little too clean, too rehearsed. She'd always had explanations, but now, as I thought back on it, something didn't add up. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the silence of the house became unbearable. I grabbed my phone and stared at the screen, thumb hovering over her contact. The clock read 1:30 a.m. No texts, no updates, just silence. That's when I did something I promised myself I'd never do. I opened our shared phone plan. I knew I was crossing a line, invading her privacy, but I couldn't stop myself. It took only a few clicks. There it was, plain as day, dozens of calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize. The messages started about a month ago and got more frequent by the day. They weren't just during work hours either. Some of them were sent late at night, long after I thought she was asleep next to me. I felt sick. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. Maybe it was nothing, I told myself. Maybe it was some work thing or a friend. But deep down I knew. You know when your gut just knows, no matter how much you try to convince yourself otherwise? That was me, sitting in the dark, staring at the evidence I hadn't even wanted to find. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, waiting for what? I didn't know. By the time the sun started creeping through the blinds, I still hadn't gotten a single text from Jessica. No apology for staying out late. No excuse about losing track of time. Nothing. I must have checked my phone 100 times, hoping for some kind of explanation, anything that would make the sick feeling in my gut go away. But there was nothing. Then, at 7:30 a.m., I heard the sound of heels clicking against the front steps. I didn't even realize I'd fallen asleep on the couch until I jolted awake at the noise. The front door creaked open, and there she was, Jessica, hair slightly messy, makeup smeared, and smelling like a mix of alcohol and perfume. She stood there, framed by the doorway, as if everything was normal. Like she wasn't about to blow up our entire life. She gave me this lazy smile. "Good morning," she said, like she hadn't just stayed out all night without a single word. She didn't even look sorry. She just walked past me like I was invisible, like her actions didn't matter. I sat up and stared at her. My voice came out harsher than I meant, but I didn't care anymore. Where the hell were you? She stopped, turned slowly, and met my eyes. But instead of the usual defensive excuses or a half-hearted apology, she laughed. She actually laughed. Are we really doing this now? She said. Now it's too early for your drama. Drama. That was the word she chose. I stood up, trying to keep my anger in check. I stayed up all night waiting for you. No texts, no calls, and now you're standing here like nothing's wrong? Don't act like I'm the one being unreasonable. She rolled her eyes. I told you I was going to a party. I didn't think I needed to give you a minute-by-minute update. We're not teenagers. But here's the thing. It wasn't just the party. It wasn't even about staying out all night. It was the complete lack of respect in her voice. The way she was looking at me like I was a nuisance in her life. I could feel my hands shaking, not out of fear, but sheer frustration. Who's the guy? The words just came out sharp and cold. I hadn't planned on saying it, but once they were out there, I couldn't take them back. She froze for a second. It was barely noticeable, but I caught it, the slight hesitation before she turned away, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. Oh God. You really are paranoid. There's no guy. Don't lie to me, Jessica. I checked the phone bill. The silence that followed was deafening. I hadn't wanted to say it, but there it was, hanging in the air between us. Her entire expression changed. Her smirk disappeared, replaced by something colder, something sharper. She narrowed her eyes at me like I was the one who had crossed the line. You checked the phone bill? Her voice was ice. What the hell is wrong with you? It was almost impressive, the way she flipped it on me like I was the villain here for caring where she'd been all night. But I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. Not this time. Who is he? I repeated, this time louder, my voice barely holding together. She crossed her arms, still not looking at me. It's nobody. You're being ridiculous. But her voice was different now, less confident, more calculated. She was testing the waters, seeing if she could still talk her way out of this like she always did. I took a step closer. You've been texting and calling someone almost every day for a month, late at night, and now you're out all night dressed like that, and you think I'm just supposed to believe it's nothing? For the first time, she seemed to lose her composure. Her jaw clenched, and she finally turned to face me. It's none of your business, she said through gritted teeth. You don't own me. Suddenly fine. But it wasn't. Nothing was fine. She disappeared. And there it was. That final admission, buried under layers of deflection. She didn't deny it anymore. She didn't try to explain. She just made it clear that she didn't care what I thought, that my feelings weren't her concern. I stood there, numb, staring at the woman I thought I knew. There was no shouting, no dramatic argument, no tears. Just this cold, quiet realization that the person standing in front of me had changed. Or maybe she'd always been this way, and I was just now seeing it. She turned on her heel and walked toward the bedroom. I'm going to sleep, she said over her shoulder, like that was the end of the conversation, like everything was. 8:10. Into the bedroom without another word, the door clicked shut behind her. The sound echoed in my ears, leaving a strange emptiness in the room as if the air had been sucked out. I stood there motionless, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't the silence that hurt, it was her complete indifference. She hadn't even tried to explain herself, hadn't bothered to cover up her tracks or soften the blow. She just walked away like I didn't matter, like we didn't matter. I collapsed back onto the couch, my mind racing. A month, at least a month. She'd been talking to someone else late at night, while I was sleeping in the next room. She was texting some guy, and she hadn't even flinched when I confronted her. She just looked right through me. What was I supposed to do with that? My thoughts were spiraling, every memory of the past few weeks unraveling in real time. The nights she stayed out late, claiming she was with Stacy, the new gym routine, The random work dinners she never used to have. I had missed all the signs, or maybe I just hadn't wanted to see them. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. For a moment, I thought it might be her texting me some half-baked excuse or apology from the other room. But when I checked, it was a notification from our phone plan app. My heart dropped. I hadn't turned off the alert for that number, the one she'd been calling. A new message had just come through from that number at 7:48 a.m. She hadn't even been in the house for 20 minutes, and she was already talking to him. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I clicked on the number. I wanted to see who he was. I needed to know. A name popped up on the screen, Mark. Not a work contact, not some random friend, but Mark, a guy I didn't know with a number I'd never seen. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking as I opened the call log. 46 calls in the past 2 weeks, dozens of text messages, all late at night, all while she was supposedly too tired to talk. There was no denying it now. This was real. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. Jessica had been seeing someone else. I heard movement from the bedroom. The door opened slightly, and she peeked out, her face calm, like nothing had happened. "Are you seriously still on this?" she asked, her tone flat, almost bored. I looked up at her, phone still in hand. "I know it's him," I said quietly. "Mark. That's his name, isn't it?" For a second, she didn't react. Then, with a small shrug, she said, "Yeah, so what?" Like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she had just admitted to forgetting to pick up milk from the store. "Yeah, so what?" That's when everything inside me snapped. I wasn't even angry at that point. I was past anger, past hurt. It was something else now, numbness. Cold, clear numbness. "How long?" I asked, my voice hollow. Jessica rolled her eyes, like I was being ridiculous for asking. "I don't know, a few months maybe." She leaned against the door frame, completely unfazed. "Does it really matter?" My mind couldn't comprehend her words. Does it really matter? How could she stand there, acting like it was no big deal? My world was falling apart, and she couldn't even be bothered to look guilty. I stood up slowly. "You've been seeing him for months, lying to me, going behind my back, and you're standing here asking if it matters?" She crossed her arms, annoyed. "I didn't lie to you. I just didn't tell you everything." Her voice had this edge to it, like I was the unreasonable one for feeling betrayed. "You've been so controlling lately, always questioning me. So yeah, I needed space, and Mark, he gets it. He doesn't suffocate me like you do." My mind was reeling. Controlling? Suffocating? Was that how she justified this to herself? Space? I laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was bitter, hollow. "You needed space, so you ran to another guy? You cheated because I cared about where you were?" Jessica tilted her head, her expression bored, like she was over this entire conversation. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. We didn't even sleep together until last week, if that's what you're really upset about." The casual way she said it, like it was nothing, made my stomach turn. "Last week," I repeated the words, barely registering. My entire body felt cold. I didn't even know what to say anymore. "Yeah, it just happened. But if you'd stop overreacting, you'd see that it's not a big deal. We've been drifting apart for a while now, and you know it." She said it like it was some simple fact, like I was supposed to just accept it and move on. I could barely look at her. She wasn't the woman I thought she was, not anymore. Maybe she never had been. I turned away, staring out the window. The room felt too small, too suffocating. I couldn't stand to be in the same space as her. "Get out," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Jessica's eyes widened, caught off guard for the first time. "What?" "Get out," I repeated, louder this time, turning to face her. "I don't care where you go, just leave. Now." For a moment she looked like she might argue, but then, without another word, she grabbed her purse from the counter, slipping on her shoes like this was just another ordinary morning. "Fine," she said, brushing past me towards the door. "I'll go, But don't expect me to come crawling back. You did this to yourself." And with that, she walked out, slamming the door behind her. The house fell into silence again, but this time it was different. This time, the silence felt final, like something had broken that could never be fixed. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house, leaving a ringing in my ears. I stood there, still staring at the spot where Jessica had been just moments before. The empty space somehow felt heavier than her presence. It was strange. After months of feeling like she was slipping away, the house now felt suffocating without her. I don't even know how long I stood there, just frozen. My mind was blank, except for one thought looping over and over: she's gone. She's really gone. And yet, even in that moment, I couldn't tell if I was devastated or relieved. Maybe both. I collapsed onto the couch, still clutching my phone, my hands trembling. The notifications for her and Mark's calls were still there, staring back at me, as if mocking everything I thought I knew about my life. How had it come to this? How had I let it get this bad without realizing? I dropped the phone onto the coffee table and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. My chest was tight, but not from crying. Tears never came. I felt hollow, numb, almost as if my brain was refusing to process what had just happened. I wanted to feel angry. I wanted to scream, break something, punch a wall, anything to release the pressure building inside me. But nothing happened. I just sat there, as though I were stuck in some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My mind started racing again, going back over every detail, every moment that led up to this. I thought about the night we met, how she'd walked into that bar with a confidence that had drawn me in immediately. She was different back then, funny, spontaneous, real. At least I thought she was. But now it felt like I'd been living with a stranger, and I was only just realizing it. And then there was Mark, some guy I'd never met, never even heard of, who somehow became more important to her than I was. The worst part wasn't even that she cheated. It was the fact that she didn't care. She didn't even try to lie to me when I asked her who he was. She just shrugged it off like it was nothing, like I was nothing. I should have seen this coming. Maybe I did deep down, but I'd convinced myself it couldn't happen to me, that we were stronger than this, that I was stronger than this. But clearly, I was wrong. Jessica had been slipping away for months, and I'd been too blind to notice or too stupid to accept it. The last few conversations we had played in my head like some twisted highlight reel, all the little moments where I'd asked if something was wrong, and she'd brushed me off. I remembered the time she came home late, the nights she turned away from me in bed, claiming she was tired, the nights when I could feel her slipping away inch by inch. But I hadn't done a damn thing about it because I didn't want to seem paranoid. And now it was too late. She was gone, and I was left here in this empty house with nothing but the weight of her absence. The reality of it all started to settle in. She wasn't just gone for the day. She wasn't coming back. This wasn't some fight we could fix with a few apologies and promises to do better. This was it, the end of us. And as much as I wanted to believe otherwise, I knew there was no coming back from this. Not after what she'd said, not after what she'd done. A cold wave of clarity washed over me. The weight of the situation finally hit me. Jessica wasn't just some confused woman looking for a way out of a rough patch. She had chosen this. She had decided that Mark was worth more than everything we built. And the way she had looked at me, with that cold indifference, I knew this wasn't something she regretted. She was done with me, and she had been for a while. I was just the last to know. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally got up and started moving. I needed to do something, anything to stop myself from thinking. My hands started working without my brain really catching up. I grabbed a trash bag from the kitchen and started going through the house, gathering every trace of her I could find: clothes, makeup, that stupid scarf she'd bought and never wore, the perfume that now made me feel sick to my stomach. I wanted it all out. Each item I threw into the bag felt like a small victory, as though I was purging her from my life, piece by piece. The photos were the hardest. There was one of us from our first vacation together, smiling at the beach like we had the world ahead of us. I stared at it for a long time before ripping it in half. She wasn't that person anymore. Neither was I. I tossed the pieces into the bag and kept going. By the time I finished, the house felt eerily empty. The air was heavy, the walls too quiet. But at least she wasn't here anymore. At least I didn't have to see her face, hear her voice, or pretend that we could somehow fix this. As I sat back down, exhausted, a new thought crossed my mind. What was I supposed to do now? I hadn't even thought that far ahead. It was like the rug had been pulled out from under me, and I was still free falling, not sure where or how I'd land. But one thing was clear. This wasn't going to end with me sitting here, waiting for her to come crawling back. She made her choice, and I wasn't going to be her backup plan, not anymore. She thought she could just walk out of my life and leave me shattered, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I had no idea what came next. Divorce, maybe, confronting Mark? The thought crossed my mind, but what good would that do? What was I going to do? Ask him why he ruined my life? No. I needed to figure out how to move forward, how to rebuild after everything had been torn apart. I didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was for sure. This was the beginning of the end for Jessica and me. And for the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, that wasn't the worst thing in the world. The house was still almost eerily so. Every object, every shadow seemed sharper in the absence of Jessica. It was like her leaving stripped everything of the comfort it once held. I should have felt relieved that she was gone, but instead, I was stuck in this odd limbo, caught between disbelief and the crushing weight of reality. The house felt like a stranger's home now. My own walls, once filled with laughter, arguments, and shared secrets, felt alien. I sat back on the couch, the trash bag of her things at my feet, and let out a long breath. There was nothing left to do except face the truth. It's strange how you can live with someone for years, share a bed, meals, memories, and then, in a moment, it's like you never knew them at all. All the promises, the future plans, gone. All it took was one name, Mark, and everything fell apart. I had to tell someone. I couldn't sit in that silence any longer, trapped in my own thoughts. So I called my best friend, Eric. He picked up on the second ring, groggy, but concerned. "Hey man, what's up? You all right?" His voice was still thick with sleep, but I could hear the undercurrent of worry. I rarely called this early unless something was seriously wrong. I didn't know where to start. "Eric, she's gone." There was a long pause on the other end. "Wait, what do you mean gone? Like she left?" "Left. She's been seeing someone, some guy named Mark. It's been going on for months, apparently. She admitted it this morning, like it was no big deal. She walked out." I could hear the anger starting to creep into my voice, the numbness giving way to something darker. Eric cursed under his breath. "Jesus, man, I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry." "Yeah, well, sorry doesn't change anything." My voice cracked, betraying the flood of emotions that had been building inside me all night. "She doesn't even care, Eric. She didn't even try to explain. It was like I didn't matter anymore, like I never did. Man, I can't believe this. She seemed so into you. I mean, sure, things have been tense, but I never thought she'd do something like this." His words were filled with genuine disbelief, but they weren't helping. "Yeah, well, she did. And now she's gone." I let out a bitter laugh. "Just like that." Eric was quiet for a moment, and then he asked, "What are you going to do now?" The question hit me like a punch. What was I going to do? I hadn't thought that far ahead. All I knew was that I couldn't just sit there and wallow in the mess she'd left behind. I don't know yet. Divorce, I guess. I mean, what else is there to do? It's not like I can just forgive her. Are you sure about that? Eric's voice was hesitant. "I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but maybe there's more to this. Have you guys really talked?" I clenched my jaw, trying to keep the frustration in check. "There's nothing to talk about, Eric. She cheated. She's been lying to me for months. What's there to even say after that? I get it, man. I'm just saying, Sometimes people make mistakes. Stupid, awful mistakes. But that doesn't mean it's over if you don't want it to be. His words stung. I knew he was trying to help, but the idea of even considering forgiveness right now made my blood boil. I'm not going to be some idiot waiting around while she figures out whether she wants me or this other guy. She made her choice. Eric sighed on the other end, probably realizing this wasn't the time to push. All right, I hear you. But whatever you decide, just don't make any rash decisions right now. Let things settle a bit. I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. I just felt lost, like everything I thought I knew about my life had been ripped away in a matter of hours. After a few more awkward exchanges, I hung up and tossed my phone onto the couch. That's when I noticed something. Jessica had left her laptop on the kitchen counter. It was half open, the screen dark. My heart started pounding. I didn't want to snoop. Hell, I already hated myself for checking the phone bill, but something told me there was more that I wasn't seeing. I walked over, hands shaky, and flipped the screen open. The laptop whirred to life, and her desktop popped up, no password. Jessica had never been one for security. For some reason, that felt like the final insult. So careless, so confident that I'd never dig deeper. She probably thought I'd be too much of a coward to look. I opened her browser and went straight to her emails. I wasn't proud of it, but at this point, pride didn't matter. I needed to know what else she was hiding. Scrolling through her inbox, it didn't take long to find him. A thread of emails between her and Mark going back for weeks. Flirty, casual, full of inside jokes I didn't understand, as if they had their own secret world. But then I hit one email, and it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Subject: last weekend was amazing. I clicked on it, dreading what I might see, and there it was, in plain text, plans to meet up at a hotel, details about how great their time together had been, even a damn photo of them together, smiling, happy. She looked radiant in a way I hadn't seen in months. And it wasn't just a casual fling. They'd been planning things, future weekends, trips. My head spun, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. It wasn't just some drunken mistake, some one-time thing. She'd been actively building a life with this guy while still living in our home, still pretending to be my wife. I slammed the laptop shut, unable to look at it anymore. The betrayal ran deeper than I thought. It wasn't just about a physical affair, it was emotional. She had checked out of our marriage long before I even realized, and worse, she didn't care. She'd left me in the dark, living a double life without a second thought. The anger surged again, but this time it was mixed with a deep, gnawing sadness. She had chosen him over me, over everything we built. And now, I was left with the pieces. I stared at the closed laptop, my mind racing with 100 different thoughts, none of them leading anywhere good. I could feel the weight of the next decision pressing down on me, but no answer seemed right. For the first time, I truly understood the phrase, the point of no return. I had just crossed it. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that closed laptop like it was some kind of bomb about to go off. The photo of Jessica and Mark burned into my mind, felt like a knife twisting deeper with every passing second. She wasn't just having an affair, she was happy. She looked at him the way she used to look at me, with that smile that made her eyes light up. It was like I was looking at a version of her that had been long gone from my life, only to find out she'd been saving it for someone else. The shock turned into this cold, bitter numbness. My body moved on autopilot as I grabbed my jacket from the chair and headed for the door. I couldn't stay in that house any longer, not with the reminders of her scattered everywhere. I needed air, space to think, something to keep me from sinking into the flood of emotions that threatened to drown me. I walked down the street, not really knowing where I was going. It didn't matter. I just needed to keep moving. The cool breeze slapped my face, but it wasn't enough to clear my head. Every step I took felt like a step further from my old life and deeper into the unknown. But one thing was clear, there was no going back now. I pulled out my phone, staring at it like it was some foreign object. Part of me wanted to call her, demand answers, scream at her for what she'd done. But what was the point? She'd already told me everything I needed to know, even without saying it directly. Her choice had been made, and I wasn't part of it. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled down to a number I hadn't dialed in years, my lawyer's. The sight of it sent a chill through me. Divorce. It was such a cold, sterile word, but now it was becoming my reality. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the call button. Once I made that call, there would be no more pretending. No more hoping that maybe this was just a phase, that we could somehow patch things up. But then I remembered the emails, the hotel, the plans she had made with Mark. She wasn't just cheating, she was already mapping out a future without me, a future where I was just a footnote in her past. The anger surged back stronger this time. I hit the call button before I could second-guess myself. The line rang twice before a familiar voice picked up. "Hey Greg, it's been a while. What's going on?" Hearing my lawyer's voice made the decision feel even more real, but I forced myself to speak. "David, I need your help. About Jessica. I need to file for divorce." There was a pause on the other end. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you sure about this? You know it's not something to rush into." "I'm sure," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "She's been cheating on me for months. I found out everything this morning. There's no saving this." David didn't push any further. "All right, let's meet in my office tomorrow, and we'll go over the details. I'll need to get some information from you, but we can get the process started." "Yeah, tomorrow works." I ended the call quickly before the weight of what I'd just done could sink in fully. I stood there on the sidewalk, the phone still clutched in my hand, feeling a strange mix of relief and grief. I had just set something in motion that would officially end my marriage, and I didn't know whether to be proud of myself for finally taking action or sick to my stomach for giving up on 7 years of my life. I kept walking, the streets empty, my thoughts running wild. Memories of Jessica flashed through my mind, uninvited, like ghosts from a life that no longer existed. I thought of the day we moved into our house, how we picked out the paint colors together, arguing about whether the living room should be blue or green. I thought about our first Christmas, how we spent hours untangling Christmas lights and laughing like idiots when half of them didn't work. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it wasn't. It was the same Jessica, the same life, just before. Before the lies. Before Mark. I ended up in a small park, not far from our house. The bench creaked under my weight as I sat down, staring at the playground across from me. A little girl was laughing as she swung back and forth, her father pushing her gently, smiling like the happiest man in the world. For a moment, I wondered what that man's life was really like. Was he living in bliss, or was he like me, on the edge of something he couldn't see coming? The thought made my chest tighten. I'd once been like him, hadn't I? Blissfully unaware, thinking I had it all figured out. Jessica and I had been happy once. We had plans. But those plans had been shattered long before today. I just hadn't realized how far gone things were until it was too late. Sitting there, I had this sinking realization. The woman I loved wasn't the woman who had just walked out of my life. Jessica had become someone I didn't recognize. Maybe she had been changing for a while, and I was just too blind to see it. Maybe I hadn't changed enough. Either way, the reality was that we were two different people now, heading in completely opposite directions. The hours passed without me noticing. The sun started to set, casting long shadows across the park. And yet I still didn't have the energy to go home. Home. The word didn't even feel right anymore. The house might have had 4 walls, a roof, and all my things, but it wasn't home, not without the life I thought I'd have. Finally, I stood up and started the slow walk back. As I approached the house, something caught my eye, the trash bag I'd packed with. Jessica's things were still sitting by the front door where I'd left them. I picked it up, the weight of it feeling strangely satisfying. This wasn't just trash. This was the last of her, the last remnants of the life she'd chosen to discard without a second thought. I took the bag and tossed it into the large trash bin outside. The lid slammed shut, the finality of it echoing in the quiet evening air. And just like that, the first step toward moving on was taken. I didn't know what the next days, weeks, or months would look like. I wasn't naive enough to think that a single act of throwing away her things would fix the mess she'd left behind, but for the first time, I felt like I had control over something. No matter how small, the future was a blank slate now, and while that terrified me, it also felt freeing. One thing was certain. I was done being a backup plan in Jessica's story. This was my life too, and I wasn't going to let her betrayal define it. The next morning felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's skin. I'd slept in our bed, but it felt emptier than it ever had. The silence was unbearable. No sound of Jessica moving around the house, no clatter of dishes in the kitchen, just me lying there, staring at the ceiling, my mind trapped in the loop of what had happened. There was no turning back now. I'd made the call. Divorce was no longer a vague concept, something to fear or dismiss. It was coming fast. I got out of bed, my body heavy, as though gravity was stronger today. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a split second, I thought it might be Jessica, but when I checked, it was just Eric. A simple text. "You okay?" I stared at the screen, wondering how to respond. Was I okay? I wasn't sure I even knew what that word meant anymore. I sent back a quick, non-committal, "I'll be fine," before tossing the phone back onto the bed. I forced myself to move through the motions of the day: coffee, shower, clothes. Everything felt mechanical, like I was going through a checklist just to keep my mind occupied. But every task, every room I walked into, reminded me of her, the way she used to sing off-key while making breakfast, or how she'd leave her shoes by the door, always promising she'd put them away later but never did. I wasn't ready to face the world, but I had to meet David, my lawyer, to officially start the process. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, avoiding the trash bin where I'd tossed the remnants of her yesterday. The drive to David's office felt longer than usual, my thoughts heavy with the weight of what this meeting represented. I parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at the office building. The reality of it hit me again. I was about to dismantle the life we built together, brick by brick. David greeted me with the kind of polite sympathy I expected from someone who had seen countless divorces. He didn't ask how I was feeling, and for that, I was grateful. We sat down in his small office, papers spread out in front of us, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the bleak reality of my situation. "So, let's start with the basics," David said, his voice calm but businesslike. "You've been married 7 years. No kids, correct?" I nodded, my throat tight. 7 years? It sounded like a lifetime and a blink of an eye all at once. "Any joint assets? House, cars, savings?" he asked, pen poised to take notes. I swallowed hard, my mind trying to focus on the legal side of things instead of the emotional weight of it all. "The house. Yeah, we're both on the mortgage. No kids, so nothing there. We have a joint account, but most of our savings are separate. It's pretty clean, I guess." David nodded, jotting down notes. "Good. That makes things easier. Given the circumstances, we can move through this fairly quickly. Do you want to go for an uncontested divorce? If Jessica's agreeable, we can avoid dragging this out in court." An uncontested divorce. The idea of it being so clinical, so detached from the rawness of the betrayal, made me sick. But what other option was there? I couldn't fight her for something she didn't even want. "Yeah, uncontested. I just want it over with." David glanced at me, his expression softening a little. "I get that. It's the quickest way to move on." Move on. Those words hung in the air, hollow and impossible to grasp. How was I supposed to move on when every corner of my life still had her fingerprints all over it? As we wrapped up the meeting, I signed the preliminary paperwork and shook David's hand. "I'll get this filed today," he said. "You'll probably hear from her lawyer soon, but don't worry, we'll handle everything." I nodded, thanking him, and walked out of the office, feeling even more drained than when I had arrived. The legal part was done, or at least set in motion, but the emotional fallout was just beginning. Back in the car, I sat for a moment, staring at the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what I had just done. I was officially starting the process of ending my marriage, but instead of feeling relief, I felt like I'd ripped out a piece of myself and handed it over to be filed away in some cold legal document. I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the roads take me wherever they wanted. Eventually, I ended up at the one place I never thought I'd go, Stacy's house. Yeah, that's Stacy, the one Jessica had claimed to be with on all those nights she was really with Mark. Something inside me, some twisted need for answers, pushed me to her door. I knocked twice, my heart pounding in my chest. Stacy opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw me. "Oh, hey Greg. What are you doing here?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I need to know. How long have you known about Mark?" Her face shifted, guilt flickering across her features for a brief second before she tried to cover it up with a forced smile. "Greg, I'm not sure what you're—" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. "Don't lie to me. You've been covering for her, haven't you? Every time she said she was with you, she was with him. How long, Stacy?" She looked down, biting her lip, the truth too heavy to hide now. "A few months, maybe more. I don't know the exact timeline." The confirmation hit like a gut punch, even though I'd known it all along. "And you didn't think to say anything? Not once? You just stood by while she lied to me over and over?" Stacy shifted uncomfortably, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Look, Greg, it wasn't my place. Jess is my friend. I didn't want to get involved in whatever was going on between you two." "That's it?" I asked, incredulous. "You didn't want to get involved? You were involved. You helped her lie. I'm sorry, okay?" She snapped back, her eyes flashing with defensiveness. "I didn't know what else to do. Jess was unhappy, and I didn't think it was my place to ruin things for her, or for you." "Ruin things?" I shook my head, disgusted. As if things hadn't already been ruined by Jessica's betrayal. "Thanks for nothing, Stacy." I turned and walked away before she could say another word, leaving her standing there speechless. My heart was pounding, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The truth, now fully exposed, didn't bring me the clarity I'd hoped for. It just left me feeling hollow. The betrayal wasn't just from Jessica. It was from everyone who had stood by and watched while she destroyed what we had, all without a word. The people who knew the truth but said nothing. The people who let me live in the dark. As I drove away from Stacy's house, I realized something. I was done searching for answers. I had all of them now, and none of them made me feel any better. The only thing left to do was pick up the pieces and figure out how to rebuild my life without her. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I knew exactly where to start. By the time I got back to the house, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the front yard. Everything. It felt different now, lighter maybe, or maybe it was just that the numbness had finally settled in fully, like a thick fog that blurred the sharp edges of the pain. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, letting the quiet wrap around me. It was a different kind of silence now, not the suffocating kind, but the kind that comes when a decision has finally been made. The weight of Jessica's betrayal, Stacy's complicity, and the divorce was still there, but now it felt like a burden I was beginning to understand. I walked into the living room and stared at the spot where Jessica had stood that morning, looking at me with that cold indifference. It was like the memory of her lingered there, but it didn't sting as much as it had before. I was done chasing ghosts, done trying to make sense of things that had none. The phone buzzed in my pocket again. I almost didn't check it, expecting more empty messages or offers of half-hearted sympathy. But when I pulled it out, the screen showed a text from Jessica. "Jessica, can we talk?" I stared at the words, feeling a strange mix of emotions surge through me. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room, to ignore her like she'd ignored me for months. But another part of me, perhaps the part that still held on to the idea that some things deserved closure, couldn't let it go. I needed to hear what she had to say, if only to finally put this entire chapter behind me. I didn't text back. Instead, I grabbed my keys and drove. I knew where she was, probably staying at Mark's or hiding out somewhere. But if she wanted to talk, she could meet me at the place where it all started to go wrong. The drive was short, and before I knew it, I was parked in front of the coffee shop where Jessica and I had had our first real date. It felt cruelly ironic that this would be the place where everything ended, but somehow, it felt fitting too, a circle closing. I didn't wait long before her car pulled up. She got out slowly, looking around nervously before spotting me through the glass. She walked in, her face pale, like she wasn't sure what to expect. I wasn't either. Jessica slid into the chair across from me, her eyes searching mine for something. Maybe forgiveness, maybe understanding. She didn't deserve either. "Greg," she started, her voice softer than it had been in months. "I'm sorry." I didn't say anything. I just sat there, waiting for her to explain. "I didn't say anything," she continued. "I just sat there." Sorry wasn't enough. It never would be. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I didn't mean for things to get this far." The words sounded rehearsed, as if she had been practicing them in the mirror before coming here. They were hollow, empty. "You didn't mean for it to get this far?" I repeated, my voice calm but cold. "Jessica, you didn't just mess up. You lied to me. You cheated on me for months. You didn't even care enough to hide it anymore. You didn't care enough to try." Her eyes dropped to the table, guilt flashing across her face. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, her voice breaking. "Mark, it wasn't serious at first. I didn't even know what I was doing. I felt trapped, Greg. I felt disconnected from us, from you." There it was, the justification I'd been expecting. The excuse that was supposed to make it all make sense. But it didn't. Nothing she said could undo what she'd done. "You felt disconnected, so you ran off with someone else?" I asked, my voice steady, almost numb. "And you never thought to talk to me? To tell me how you were feeling before you went behind my back?" Jessica looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "I didn't know how. You'd been so distant too, Greg. We've both been distant. It's like we were living separate lives, even before Mark. I didn't know how to fix it. I thought maybe if I did something for myself, I could figure it out." Her words stung, but not in the way she probably thought. They didn't hurt because they were true. They hurt because they were the final nail in the coffin of the person I used to love. She wasn't apologizing because she was sorry. She was apologizing because she got caught. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "You didn't do this because we were distant. You did this because you wanted to. You wanted something else, something different. And instead of working on us, you decided to throw everything away." Jessica flinched at my words, but she didn't deny them. She couldn't. We both knew the truth now. "I came here because I thought maybe we could talk," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "Maybe we could, I don't know, figure something out." "Figure something out?" I repeated, incredulous. "Jessica, there's nothing left to figure out. You destroyed our marriage. There's no fixing this. I've already started the divorce process." Her face went pale, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Divorce?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "Divorce. It's over, Jessica. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She stared at me, her mouth opening as if she wanted to argue, to say something that would make me reconsider. But there was nothing left to say. She'd made her bed, and now she had to lie in it alone. The silence between us grew heavier, the weight of the finality settling in. She blinked, her eyes glassy, but no tears fell. She wasn't crying because she'd lost me. She was crying because she hadn't expected me to be the one to walk away first. After what felt like an eternity, she stood up. "I didn't want it to end like this," she whispered. I nodded, standing too. "Neither did I. But here we are." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the coffee shop, disappearing into the night. I watched her go, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over me. This was it. The end of us. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of her betrayal, the lies, the anger, it was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. I had taken back control of my life, and no matter how hard the road ahead would be, at least it was mine to walk. As I left the coffee shop and stepped into the cool night air, I realized something. I wasn't just losing Jessica. I was finding myself again. And that, above everything else, was the most important thing. Because in the end, the person I needed to forgive wasn't her, it was me. For letting her take so much from me for so long. And now I was free.